Good morning. Welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways. I want to talk a little bit more about sedentarism, COVID, life expectancy, age. There's a lot going on. So recently, people have been asking questions about what's going on in Africa. In light of the SARS-CoV-2 virus spread. And, it's very interesting to me how the discussions of the virus have changed over the past year, from spread to symptoms to mortality back to spread. Like it's considered a major deal if the virus gets around. We're no longer on a flatten the curve, it's going to be here, everyone's going to get it, we're just going to deal with the care to get through it that we need to. We've gone from that to eradicate the virus. With this constant drumbeat of low-grade, chronic fear and stress that it's just going to mutate and we're going to have to deal with it forever. And, man, it's such a fucking bummer for people, man. Talk about destroying quality of life, stressors. We're going to talk about that a little bit. So, some people look at photographs, and the obvious thing they see is that pictures of African people in Africa show skinny people, and pictures of American people in America in the media show fat people. And therefore, we know everything we need to know about COVID. And it's not true. It's not at all true. It is definitely there are some relationships there, okay? In a lot of sub-Saharan Africa. And this is very specific. The cool spot for the pandemic is large parts of sub-Saharan Africa. Now, this is not all parts. It's not. It's actually not racially divided. Okay, there are multiple races in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's not. It's not a racial thing. Okay, it's not that you can point to affluent Boers and say, "Oh, look, they're dying like flies," while the skinny, famine, impoverished black people are not. It's not how it's working. However, there's a couple things that seem to go together. One of them is more mobility in populations, more outside activity in populations. Yes, less heavily chemicalized overfeeding. We joke about Twinkies, and all the health food nuts in the U.S. are like, oh yeah, no Twinkies, but you take 7 supplements, you've got 23 pills you take every day, you've got how many medications? Oh, I'm healthy, I'm only on 3 medications a day. Your organic superfood nut and greens bar is still a processed chunk of factory shit wrapped in plastic. It's not food. Very, very few Americans really go all the way with natural food. Meaning food that is recognizable as food. I'm not even going to get into the carnivore versus herbivore debates right now. Just food that is food. Food that looks like what it started as, or is recognizably a piece of what it started as. And yeah, that pretty much excludes bread, because bread as the single staple isn't. Among the people who eat bread, very, very few actually eat anything that's qualifies as homemade, like stone ground flour that's not bleached, no preservatives, fresh, so not rancid. Sourdough culture, like an actual 24-hour sourdough culture in the dough. None of that really happens anymore. So, natural food. This is a big deal. I think that this is a bigger deal than people really want to acknowledge. Low-grade stress, constant low-grade stress. People think, life has to be so much harder when you don't have a bunch of physical things and you're not always sure where your food's going to come from. And, there's a level of acceptance to that. Not acceptance like, oh, I give in, but acceptance like, this is life. That the Western, and this goes into Southeast Asia too, the more modernized societies, or the more integrated societies, it's huge. Australia should have no problems. In terms of climate, health, everything, Australia should have no problems, but they have an insane amount of programmed stress. So, Western world, you've got this insane amount of programmed stress. And it's constant, and it's never ending, and you live in fear. You live in fear of losing all the crap that you have. You have stuff everywhere. You have food that you don't need, that's not good for you, that you shouldn't eat, but you're in fear that it could be taken away. Everything is a stressor. Okay, part of the problem of having things is if you're not in a state of acceptance, and again, acceptance is a proactive thing, you are in a state of loss, fear of loss, a lot of stress. People keep trying to go back to this obesity thing, and obesity is an effect of the same causal factors that increase susceptibility to symptomatic and mortal COVID syndrome, which apparently is caused by in association with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Once again, you have to keep these things separate, all right? The spread of the virus has nothing to do with anything. Functionally, at this point, nothing to do with anything. It's just a little virus. It's just a packet. It doesn't do anything to most people. Most people aren't going to be aware that they got exposed to it. Most people aren't going to have symptoms. Most people aren't going to have an effect. And of those who do, the majority are going to have several factors in common. And, age is part of it, okay? But is it actually just age, or is it things that go along with age? Is age a marker for other issues? Avoidable issues. This is the really big thing. This is what I think is the biggest problem going on with COVID, and probably why we can't have the conversation about Africa adequately, is that it's the things that go along with obesity or age that are the actual comorbidity factors, and nobody wants to deal with it because they're very easy. They're not easy. They're very difficult, but very simple individual level fixes. Notice that everyone is looking for a state, global, massive, sedentary, empire, enforced, slave-oriented solution. Okay, slavery is not a natural state. Neither honestly is poverty or need or want. These are not natural states of man. The earlier hunting-based, hunting-gathering-based, and pastoral, non-settled, or even non-settled agricultural societies very rarely had these sorts of things going on. You can see this with some of the modern groups that have heavily resisted integration into civilization. People talk about, the Bushman diet and stuff. It's not. Look at Southeast Asia. Look at some of the mountain peoples who've just resisted becoming part of the settled empires, the states, for so long, and just look at the differences. There's a huge difference in quality of life, internal quality of life. When you get to that settled empire state, okay, that's the masters, rulers, hierarchies, writing, code of laws, these things that are seen as the basics of civilization. That's where you get slavery. That's where you get disease. That's where you get disease. There's a lot of negatives that go along with it. And honestly, we're at a point where we could probably overcome most of the negatives, but you don't have as much leisure time as Og the caveman. Damn sure you don't. you don't have nearly as much self-sufficiency. Your stress level, it's not peak stress that we're talking about, but your day-to-day going on all the time stress level is 10, 20, 40 times higher than OGS. Okay, this is all the stuff that really comes into play with why is COVID so bad in some places and not so bad in others. People want to say, well, it's fat. Well, remember that obesity is, to a large extent, an effect. It's not a causal thing. It's an effect. It's an effect of drugs. It's an effect of dietary manipulation. And you are manipulated, okay? You can be addicted to McDonald's French fries before you ever taste one. 6 months of age. This is proven. We know this. This is how the marketing works. Obesity is also an effect of chronic stress. Okay, it doesn't hit everybody the same way. It doesn't hit everybody the same way all the time, but it's a systemic thing. This is one of the things that people don't get. It's systemic. It's not one thing that causes. It's 5, 6, 10 things that come together. And sometimes you hit this magic quantity, this magic mix, a recipe. Okay, it's always a recipe, not a single thing. And the obesity pandemic, in the West and the East, the modernizing East, has a lot to do with these factors coming in together all together. Mechanized food with a low-fat diet, with higher sugar, with state support for sugar, with chronic low-grade stress, with more sedentary lifestyles, with the same time, the idea that you're not supposed to go into the sun anymore. All of these things go together, and then you have the obesity explosion. It's not, just stop being fat, don't eat, get healthy, you're stupid. The obesity is not a cause, it's an effect. It's a symptom. It's a side effect of a lot of things, and not all of those things are easy to control. So when you look, and I keep harping on obesity because this is the big one that people use to talk about COVID, the COVID syndrome, obesity and age. People talk about, there's all these comorbidity factors, but no one actually knows what they are. No one actually looks at them and says, oh, hey, this is what I know it is. People just talk about it. Comorbidity is a talking point. Mostly what people mean is you're old or you're fat. And neither of those are actually true. There are plenty of old people who are going to have no problems, who have had no problems, who've tested positive, who've been exposed, because they don't have the factors that go along with age. That's the big thing that people are doing. You've got lots of people who are obese who are not having obesity as a comorbidity factor because they're active. All right? So take a look at that. The comorbidities to look at, okay, when you're comparing the worst of European or American results to the best of sub-Saharan African results. And remember that you're dealing with 2/3 of a continent. You can't just lump it as a single thing, okay? It's like putting Florida and New York City in the same category. You can't do that. What you do when you look at and you contrast these things is look at the comorbidity factors that are easily identifiable in socioeconomics or in culture, okay? Not medical, like diet, activity level, exposure to sunlight. Yes, age. Age is a huge deal because if your average age in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa, the average age is 18, then you've had less time for the crap to have an effect on you, okay? Think about this. Try to think it through from a different perspective, okay? And then try to see what kind of things you could do in your own life that would make a difference. Because here's the thing. None of this is something that can be solved by states, by vaccination programs, by someone else doing an additive to you. It's all subtractive. Get rid of the shit. Get rid of the indoors. Get rid of stuff. Get rid of stress. It's a big deal. And I really think that's it's the lesson of this whole pandemic that only a certain percentage of people are ever going to be able to identify. But this is a pandemic whose mortality is almost all caused by excessive shit and the stress that goes with it. And that's all programmed into you, okay? This is cultural programming. Deprogramming is quite the adventure, but I suggest you get on it. Stay sideways. We'll talk more later.